It started with the scent of another man's cologne, faint on my wife's scarf. A scent I knew. I dismissed it, of course. We'd been married for 20 years. Trust was the foundation we were built on, or so I thought. But then came the late-night texts, the sudden password changes, and the secretive smiles she'd share with her best friend, Chloe. I was just the hardworking, oblivious husband. A cliché. But when I finally stumbled upon the truth, it wasn't a simple affair. It was a web of deceit so intricate and twisted it threatened to suffocate me. My wife and her best friend weren't just sharing secrets, they were sharing husbands. The four of us were bound together in a way I could never have imagined. My first instinct was pure, unadulterated rage, but rage is a fire that burns out. What replaced it was something colder, sharper. You think you know how this ends, a screaming match, divorce papers, a broken man, think again. What I uncovered next and what I did about it changed everything. Before diving in, hit that subscribe button and comment below. Have you ever dealt with betrayal? Let's hear your stories. Part 1, The Hum of a Lie. Our life was a carefully curated portrait of suburban success. I'm Mark, 48, and for 2 decades, my universe had orbited around Sarah. We had a sprawling 2-story house in a quiet Connecticut suburb, 2 kids navigating their first years of college, and a shared history that felt as solid as the old oak tree in our front yard. I ran a small but successful construction business, the kind built on calloused hands and 60-hour work weeks. I provided, I protected, I thought that was enough. The first tremor was almost imperceptible. A shift in the atmosphere of our home, a low-frequency hum of dishonesty that you feel more than you hear. Sarah, at 46, had become vibrant, that's the word she used. She joined a high-intensity spin class with her best friend, Chloe. They were inseparable, always had been. Chloe and her husband, David, were our couple friends, the ones you vacation with, the ones you have over for barbecues where the men gather around the grill talking about stocks and sports, while the women sip Chardonnay and dissect the lives. Of their neighbors, David was my polar opposite, a soft-handed financial advisor who wore tailored suits and worried about his portfolio. I always found him a bit dull, a man who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of mild contentment. But Sarah and Chloe adored him, often teasing me about how I should learn a thing or two from David's gentle nature. The changes in Sarah were subtle at first, a new lingerie set she never modeled for me. A sudden obsession with her phone, which she'd angle away whenever I walked into the room. When I'd ask who she was texting, the answer was always the same breezy, slightly dismissive, just Chloe. You know how she is. Then came the book club that never seemed to involve any books. Every other Thursday, she and Chloe would go out, returning late, flushed with wine and giddy with secrets. I'd be half asleep on the couch, the TV droning on, and she'd kiss my forehead, her breath a sweet mix of Pinot Grigio and something else. An excitement that felt foreign. How was the book? I asked once, my voice thick with sleep. She paused just for a second. Oh, you know, same old, a lot of drama. She laughed, a sound that didn't quite reach her eyes. I chalked it up to a midlife recalibration. The kids were gone, the house was quiet, and she was searching for a new version of herself. I tried to be supportive. I complimented her new haircut, the way her spin classes were toning her legs. I suggested a weekend getaway, just the 2 of us. She agreed, but with a strange lack of enthusiasm, as if I were interrupting a more interesting conversation she was having in her head. The strain was there, a thin, high-tensile wire pulled taut between us. I was sacrificing, working my fingers to the bone to pay for the life she was so eagerly escaping, and a quiet resentment began to fester in the back of my mind. I was the reliable, sturdy foundation, but she was looking to build a new life on top of it without me. The real red flag, the one that even my willfully ignorant mind couldn't ignore, was the cologne. We had David and Chloe over for dinner. As they were leaving, Chloe gave me a quick, friendly hug. The scent that clung to her sweater was a familiar, woody fragrance. It was oud wood, the expensive cologne I'd bought for David's birthday last year. An hour later, as I was helping Sarah clear the table, she leaned over me to grab a plate. There it was again. The same distinct, expensive scent lingering faintly on her hair. My blood ran cold. I told myself it was a coincidence. They'd been in the same house, maybe she'd brushed past him. But the hum of the lie grew louder, becoming a deafening roar in the quiet of our bedroom that night. Part 2, the digital ghost. The truth, when it came, wasn't delivered in a dramatic confrontation or an anonymous tip. It arrived silently through the cold, impartial glow of an iPad screen. Our family shared a cloud account, a digital filing cabinet for photos, documents, and the mundane detritus of modern life. I was on the old iPad in the study, trying to find a receipt for a tax write-off, when a notification banner slid down from the top of the screen. A message for Sarah. It was from a group chat named the Book Club. My finger hovered over the notification. It was an invasion of privacy, a line I'd never crossed. But the suspicion, now a coiled snake in my gut, struck. I opened it, and my world ended. The chat had 4 members: Sarah, Chloe, David, and a man named Mark, but the messages weren't from me. They were from another Mark, or rather, that's the name Chloe used for me in the chat. It took me a moment to understand the sickening symmetry of it all. They were all in it, my wife and her best friend, and they were seeing each other's husbands. The messages were a timeline of our shared deception. Chloe, David is snoring on the couch. God, I need a real man. You free Thursday, Mark. Sarah, careful, he almost caught on about the cologne last week. Had to say you spilled a sample on me at the mall. He bought it. He buys everything. David, dinner was fun. Watching my wife hug my best friend, knowing what he doesn't know, it's a hell of a thrill. Sarah to David, you were amazing last night. Mark just falls asleep. You make me feel seen. I scrolled up, my hands shaking, my breath catching in my throat. There were pictures. A selfie of Sarah and David in his car, her head on his shoulder, both of them smiling with a carefree intimacy I hadn't seen from her in years. A picture of Chloe's legs intertwined with what had to be mine, judging from the familiar watch on the wrist of the arm resting on her thigh. But I had no memory of that picture. It took me a full minute to realize they had nicknamed my own husband persona in their twisted game. No, the arm in the photo was mine, but the legs were Chloe's. My wife had taken a picture of me sleeping, my arm draped over her, and Chloe had photoshopped her own legs in as a sick joke for the group. The caption read, "He's all mine tonight, S." The betrayal was so total, so audacious, it was almost surreal. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated, long-running game. They had swapped us. They were living a parallel life right under our noses, laughing at our ignorance. The book club was their shared alibi, their private joke. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. It felt like every memory of the last year, every shared laugh, every "I love you" was a lie. I wasn't a husband, I was a prop in their sordid little play. I sat there in the dark study for what felt like hours, the blue light of the iPad illuminating my face. The house was silent. Sarah was asleep upstairs, probably dreaming of David. The man I'd shared beers with, whose back I'd patted after his favorite team lost. The woman my wife called her sister. The 4 of us, a cozy little quadrangle of deceit. The snake in my gut uncoiled, and its venom was no longer just pain. It was pure, ice-cold fury. Part 3, a symphony of silence. The days that followed were a masterclass in self-control. The rage was a wild animal clawing at the inside of my skull, demanding to be let out. I wanted to smash things, to scream at Sarah until my voice was raw, to drive to David's house and rearrange his perfectly symmetrical face. But I did none of that. A primal, calculating instinct took over, whispering that a premature explosion would only grant them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. They didn't deserve my pain. They deserved a reckoning. So I became a ghost in my own life. I moved through our home with a chilling quietness, my grief and fury locked away behind a mask of weary normalcy. I was an observer, a detective in the ruins of my own marriage. I watched Sarah text under the dinner table, a small, secret smile playing on her lips, and I would feel a strange, disembodied calm. I was no longer the schmuck husband. I was the architect of her downfall, and she didn't even know it. The internal turmoil was a constant, churning sea. Waves of self-doubt crashed over me in the dead of night. Where had I gone wrong? Had I become so boring, so predictable, that this was her only escape? I replayed the last few years in my mind, searching for the moment the fracture had appeared. Was it when I poured all my energy into the business to pay for our daughter's tuition? Or the nights I'd come home, bone-tired and smelling of sawdust, and fallen asleep on the couch before we could even talk? These questions were a form of self-flagellation, a desperate attempt to find a logic that simply wasn't there. Then there were the flashbacks, sharp and painful. I'd remember Sarah years ago tracing the lines on my palm and telling me she loved my hands because they built things. I'd remember the raw, uninhibited passion we'd shared, the way her body felt against mine, the scent of her hair on the pillow. These memories were now tainted, poisoned by the knowledge that she was sharing that intimacy, that vulnerability, with another man. The erotic tension of our past was now a weapon turned against me, each fond memory a fresh stab of betrayal. I started to see the irony in everything. The dark humor of the situation became a strange coping mechanism. One morning, Sarah came into the kitchen, humming. She was wearing a new silk robe. "You're in a good mood," I said, my voice carefully neutral as I stirred my coffee. "Just feeling refreshed," she said, stretching languidly. "Chloe and I are going to try that new yoga studio today, a little self-care." I knew from the chat logs that yoga was their code for meeting up at a discreet hotel halfway between our towns. "That's great, honey," I said, smiling. "You deserve it." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but the look of serene condescension on her face fueled my resolve. She saw me as a piece of furniture, a comfortable fixture in her life that she no longer had to pay attention to. She had no idea the furniture was listening. Part 4, the echoes in the hallway. My passive observation couldn't last forever. I needed to know the depth of their arrogance. I decided to set a small trap, to dangle a thread and see if she would pull it. We were getting ready for a neighborhood block party, and I casually mentioned that I'd been talking to David's brother, Kevin, who worked in commercial real estate. Kevin said David's been working crazy hours lately, I said, watching her reflection in the mirror as she applied her lipstick, thinking about a big career move. A flicker of panic in her eyes, so quick I would have missed it if I hadn't been looking for it. She recovered instantly. "Oh, you know David, total workaholic," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Chloe complains about it all the time, says she barely sees him." It was a perfect, practiced lie. According to their texts, David had been taking half-days twice a week for his trysts with Sarah. The gaslighting was so effortless, so smooth, it was chilling. She wasn't just a cheater, she was a virtuoso of deceit. The true moment of defiance, the one that erased any lingering shred of doubt or pity I might have had for her, came a few nights later. I feigned sleep as she slipped out of bed around midnight, thinking I was unconscious after 2 glasses of whiskey. I heard her tiptoe down the hall to the guest room. I crept out of our room and stood in the darkness of the hallway, listening to her whispered phone call. "No, he's completely clueless," she murmured, and a bitter laugh escaped her. "Mark's a good man, a simple man. He sees what he wants to see." A pause. "I know, Chloe, but we have to be more careful. That text you sent David today was reckless. What if he'd seen it?" Her words were a cocktail of pity and contempt. A simple man. For a moment my hand clenched into a fist. The urge to storm in there, to rip the phone from her hand and watch the color drain from her face, was overwhelming. But I held my ground, melting back into the shadows of the hallway. She wasn't just cheating, she was mocking me. She and Chloe weren't just conspirators. They were a mutual admiration society built on the foundation of their husbands' perceived inadequacies. They felt trapped, they claimed in their texts, by men who didn't understand their need for passion and adventure. It wasn't just about sex, it was about power. They felt entitled to this, a secret life that made them feel alive, and their greatest thrill was getting away with it right under our noses. That whispered conversation in the dead of night was the final nail in the coffin of the man I used to be. The simple man died in that hallway. An architect was about to take his place. Part 5, the architect of chaos. The transition from victim to strategist was liberating. The grief receded, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. If they wanted a game, I would give them a game. But I would be the one setting the rules, and I would be the one who decided when it was over. My first move was to gather evidence. I spent hours poring over the synced messages on the iPad, taking screenshots of the most damning conversations, the photos, the plans. I saved them to a thumb drive, which I kept in a lockbox at my office. I became a digital archaeologist, unearthing the artifacts of their betrayal. I went through old phone bills, highlighting the frequent late-night calls between Sarah and David. I checked our credit card statements, cross-referencing her girls' night dinners with hotel bar charges that appeared on the same dates. It was meticulous, painstaking work, but with every piece of evidence I collected, I felt a piece of myself being reclaimed. I played the part of the devoted, slightly boring husband to perfection. I brought Sarah flowers. I complimented her on how happy she seemed. I'd ask about her book club, feigning interest. "So, who's the protagonist in this month's book?" I'd ask with a straight face. The way she would stumble, inventing a plot on the spot, was a small, satisfying victory. Each lie she told was another brick in the wall she was building around herself, a wall I planned to bring crashing down. My greatest weapon was their arrogance. They had become so comfortable in their deception that they were getting sloppy. One afternoon, I came home early and found a gift bag from a high-end jewelry store on the passenger seat of Sarah's car. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. It wasn't my taste, and our anniversary wasn't for months. Later that evening, while Chloe and David were over, I watched as Chloe fidgeted with a new, identical silver bracelet on her wrist. "A gift from her, Mark, for a recent promotion," she announced to the table. Sarah just smiled, a knowing glance passing between her and David. They were buying each other gifts through us. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I needed a plan. A simple confrontation wasn't enough. 4 people in a room screaming at each other would be messy, unsatisfying. It would allow them to control the narrative, to twist the story, to paint me as the jealous, explosive husband. No, this needed to be a performance. A carefully staged reveal where their lies would be laid bare in a way they couldn't escape. It needed to be calm, methodical, and utterly devastating. I found my stage, our bi-monthly dinner party, the 4 of us. It was their sacred ritual, the very event that had provided the cover for their affair. It was only fitting that it would be the place where it all came to an end. I started planning the menu, the wine, the background music. I was no longer just a husband. I was a producer, a director, and the star of a show that had only one performance scheduled, and the finale would be unforgettable. Part 6, an invitation to the truth. The week leading up to the dinner party was thick with a surreal tension that only I was aware of. I was a bomb maker, carefully assembling the components of a device that would shatter our 4 lives. Sarah saw my meticulous planning as an attempt to reconnect. She was more affectionate, more attentive, mistaking my quiet focus for a renewed sense of domesticity. "You seem really invested in this dinner," she said one evening, wrapping her arms around my waist from behind as I studied a recipe. "It's nice. I just want it to be a night to remember," I replied, my voice even. The double meaning hung in the air, completely lost on her. I chose the menu with ironic precision, an appetizer of deviled eggs. A main course of slow-braised beef short ribs, a dish that takes hours of patient cooking before it becomes tender enough to fall off the bone, a metaphor for my own slow-burning plan. For dessert, a decadent molten lava cake, dark and bitter with a hidden, fiery core. On the morning of the dinner, I told Sarah I needed to run to my office to print out some documents. Instead, I went to a print shop. I had prepared 4 neat, spiral-bound dossiers. Each one contained a curated selection of the evidence. On the cover of each, I printed a name: Sarah, Chloe, David, Mark. Inside were screenshots of their texts, credit card statements with incriminating charges highlighted, and a detailed timeline of their affair that I had pieced together. The crown jewel was a high-resolution print of the doctored photo of Chloe's legs with my sleeping body. When I got home, Sarah was in the shower, the steam and the sound of running water filling the upstairs. I walked into our bedroom and saw her phone on the nightstand. It was a new one, but I had her password. I'd seen her type it in a dozen times. A few quick taps, and I airdropped a single, large video file from my phone to hers. Then I connected her phone to the living room smart TV via Bluetooth, a feature we often used to share photos with guests. It was ready. The trigger was set. Chloe and David arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, bearing a bottle of expensive Cabernet. They were all smiles and easy charm. "Something smells amazing, Mark," Chloe trilled, giving me a hug that made my skin crawl. "He's been in the kitchen all day," Sarah said, beaming. "He's been in such a good mood lately." We made small talk over drinks. They talked about their jobs, their upcoming vacation plans. I listened, nodded, and smiled, a gracious host to the vipers in my home. I felt an almost out-of-body calmness, the serene focus of a surgeon before the first incision. The stage was set, the audience was seated. The performance was about to begin. Part 7, The Last Supper. Dinner was a masterpiece of tension. I played the part of the genial host, refilling wine glasses, making self-deprecating jokes about my cooking, and steering the conversation with subtle precision. I asked David about his work, using the information I knew to be false. Sarah mentioned you've been a ghost at home lately, I said, looking at him with mock sympathy. Burning the midnight oil for that big promotion. David shifted in his seat, glancing at Sarah. Something like that, you know how it is. Got to stay ahead of the game. Absolutely, I said, raising my glass, to staying ahead of the game. They all drank to it. The irony was so thick I could taste it. After the main course, as I was clearing the plates, I announced, you know, Sarah and I were going through old vacation photos the other day. It's amazing what you forget. I thought it would be fun to take a little trip down memory lane. I walked over to the TV console and picked up Sarah's phone. Honey, you don't mind if I use your phone, do you? Mine's almost dead. Of course not, she said, waving a dismissive hand. I turned on the 65-inch screen. The TV flickered to life, showing her phone's home screen mirrored in perfect clarity for everyone to see. I swiped to her photo gallery. Let's see, I mused, scrolling slowly. Here are some from that trip to Napa. Innocent photos filled the screen. The four of us, smiling, arms around each other, toasts frozen in time. They all chuckled, reminiscing. And here's one from the beach house last summer, I continued, my voice steady. More smiles, more shared memories that were now nothing but lies. Oh, what's this? I asked, my voice laced with feigned confusion. On the screen, in crystal clear high definition, was a screenshot. It was the text from Chloe to me, or her version of me. Chloe, David is snoring on the couch. God, I need a real man. You free Thursday, Mark, a collective intake of breath. The silence in the room was sudden and absolute. Chloe's face went white. David stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. That's not what it looks like, Chloe stammered, her voice a thin whisper. Isn't it? I replied calmly, swiping to the next image. It was Sarah's text to David. Sarah, you were amazing last night. Mark just falls asleep. You make me feel seen. Sarah shot to her feet. Mark, turn it off. What are you doing? I think the question is, what were you doing? I said, my voice dropping, losing its friendly edge. I kept swiping. A screenshot of their hotel bar receipts, a picture of the identical bracelets, and then the finale. The doctored photo of my sleeping body with Chloe's legs, with Sarah's sick caption beneath it. A choked sob escaped from David. Chloe looked like she was going to be physically ill. Sarah simply stared, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. She hadn't been caught. She had been dissected, her secret splayed out for all to see on a television screen in the middle of our living room. I turned off the TV and the room plunged back into a suffocating silence. I walked to the sideboard and picked up the 4 bound dossiers. I tossed one to each of them. Their names stared up from the covers. I believe this is the book for this month's meeting, I said, my voice dripping with ice. A story of love, lust, and breathtaking stupidity. I call it the Book Club. Part 8, 4 Broken Pieces. The explosion I had expected never came. There was no screaming, no shouting. The aftermath of the reveal was something far worse. A dead, hollow silence, filled only by the sound of pages turning as they each flipped through the evidence of their own treachery. It was the quiet, rustling sound of 4 lives falling apart. David was the first to break. He dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking. He wasn't angry, he was pathetic. A weak man confronted with the consequences of his fleeting thrill-seeking. I don't understand, he mumbled, not looking at anyone. Chloe, on the other hand, went on the offensive. Her face, moments ago pale with shock, was now flushed with fury. You son of a bitch, she hissed, her eyes locking onto mine. You spied on us, you violated our privacy. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Privacy, you 4 were living in a glass house and you were too busy throwing stones to notice. You blew up your own lives, I just provided the slow-motion replay. Sarah finally found her voice, but it was frail, broken. Mark, please. We can talk about this. Talk. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just a vast, empty space where our 20 years of history used to be. The time for talking was before you and your best friend decided to treat your husbands like trading cards. Before you took pictures of me in my sleep for your sick little fan club, the talking is over. I had one last piece of theater prepared. I walked into the kitchen and returned with two packed suitcases. I set one down at Sarah's feet and the other at Chloe's. I took the liberty of packing you both a bag, I said. Just the essentials, David. I trust you'll take Sarah for the night. Seems only fair. And Chloe, I said, turning to her, you're on your own. The finality of it all finally seemed to register. This wasn't a fight they could win. It wasn't a drama they could manipulate. It was an ending. Sarah looked at me, her eyes pleading, full of tears. Where am I supposed to go? Honestly, I don't care, I said, the words as cold and hard as stone. But you're not staying here. David, seemingly on autopilot, stood up, took Sarah's suitcase, and shuffled toward the door, not even looking at his own wife. Sarah followed, a ghost in her own home, walking out into the night with the man who had helped her destroy her life. That left just me and Chloe. She stood there, defiant, her dossier clutched in her hand. You think you've won, don't you? She sneered. This wasn't a contest, I replied, opening the front door and gesturing outside. It was a pest control problem, and the house has been fumigated. Goodbye, Chloe. She held my gaze for a long moment, her eyes burning with a hatred that was almost impressive. Then, without another word, she grabbed her suitcase and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I stood alone in the center of the room, amidst the wreckage of our dinner party. The half-eaten food, the overturned wine glasses, the scattered pages of their lies. The silence that descended was the most profound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a life being erased. It was the sound of freedom. Part 9, The View from the Other Side. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and the grim logistics of dismantling a life. The divorce was surprisingly swift. My meticulously gathered evidence left no room for negotiation. Sarah and Chloe, in their infinite wisdom, had hired the same lawyer, who quickly advised them to settle. I was generous, perhaps more than I should have been, but I didn't want a protracted war. I just wanted it to be over. I sold the house, the monument to our shared lie, and split the proceeds. David filed for divorce from Chloe a week after that fateful dinner. I heard through the grapevine that he had a complete breakdown, lost his job, and moved back in with his parents. Sarah and he didn't last, of course. Their affair was built on the thrill of secrecy, and when exposed to the harsh light of reality, it disintegrated into a mess of blame and regret. For a while, I felt adrift. The silence I had craved now felt cavernous. The routines that had structured my life for 2 decades were gone, but slowly, tentatively, I began to build something new. I moved into a modern apartment downtown with a view of the city skyline. I started going to the gym, not a spin class, but a gritty boxing gym where I could sweat out the last vestiges of my anger. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected, the ones who had known me before I was just Sarah's husband. One afternoon, sitting on my new balcony and watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, I reflected on the whole sordid affair. Would it have been better if I'd never found out, if I'd remained the simple man, blissfully ignorant in my suburban cage? A part of me, the part that still remembered the comfort of that lie, whispered, yes. But the man I was becoming, He man watching that sunset with a clear and steady gaze, knew the answer was no. The betrayal had been a fire that burned my old life to the ground, but in the ashes I found something I didn't even know I had lost, myself. I was no longer just a provider, a fixture, a prop. I was Mark. I was the architect of my own life now. The catharsis wasn't in the revenge, as satisfying as that single evening had been. The true victory was in the quiet, resilient act of rebuilding, of finding joy not in a shared life, but in my own. The future was an unwritten page, and for the first time in a very long time, I was the one holding the pen. If this story hit home, like and subscribe for more gripping tales of love and betrayal. The path from heartbreak to healing is a twisted one, and everyone's journey is different. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you forgive or seek revenge? Your stories matter, and your perspective is part of a bigger conversation. Check out the next video popping up now for another twist-filled saga, where a forgotten life insurance policy reveals a deadly secret.